Okay, last lecture on this module. Going to talk about sort of what I call the household economics of SNAP, a little bit about eligibility, a little bit about how an economist might look at this sort of as a straightforward economics utility problem and think about the policy, and that's where we'll start, and then we'll move into some of the data. Some of the stuff is right from the section you were required to read, so be familiar, and hopefully we can add a little to that. So just as an overview, I'm going to look at section 10.4.4, basically explaining that economic model there on household well-being, and then look into a little bit of discussion for eligibility issues in SNAP, since sort of the key policy debate that has emerged is, are too many people getting onto the program? Is it disincentivizing work? Those sort of things. So let's go through at least the list of what's there, and that'll prepare us for your assignment where you're going to go looking for an article that basically just discusses SNAP eligibility and where people sort of have opinions or quoting data or sort of looking at inefficiency in the program. You're basically open to go look. I just want you looking for something and reading something because we're going to go into that for one of our discussion topics that is led by students later. So the first part, though, let's look at this economic model for SNAP, and I just want to highlight it if you had trouble reading it now in the chapter, because earlier chapters in that book may have been required to help you fully understand this. But this is a two-good consumption model, so this is goods that aren't food, and down here is food good, consumption of food. And so this curve is an indifference curve, right? And so if you recall from your microeconomics, the higher the indifference curve in this direction, right? So this is this level of satisfaction. There's another indifference curve that sits right here that is better, right? So utility is higher at that level. Move up here, there's another one, okay? And so the effect of the SNAP benefit, right? This is a targeted transfer. The money is given to you, but the money is only of use to spend on this category down here. It can't be used on this, right? So it's not a pure income transfer, it's a targeted transfer. And so what is the effect of that? Well, if you didn't get the benefit, your income would be, you could still buy, this is the maximum amount of other goods you can buy. And if you didn't get the SNAP benefit, this kink right here in the budget would move over here, and the income line would be parallel but down here, okay? And so the way we measure the welfare, not welfare assistance program, but welfare well-being or utility, or the sort of economic impact for this household, is what is this real income adjustment in terms of utility, right? So if without SNAP benefits you're down here, that means you're at a utility curve that is down here below the old one. And so this sort of well-being gain is whatever this utility difference is from what it would look like if you had to do without the $2 per day SNAP benefit to get to there, okay? And so it's like an income for this household that is spending some money. This is called the inframarginal case. This household is spending the SNAP benefit on food, but also some of their own money on food to get to 2,000 grams per day. And because of that, their income is, their income is large compared to the SNAP benefit, so they're spending some money on food as well. This acts like just a pure income transfer. It looks no different than if you just said, your income used to be here, and now we're going to just push it out here. And instead of the kink, the budget line went all the way up there because the kink doesn't come into play. So it acts as a pure income transfer for them. And so as an economist, we say, okay, nothing wrong with this SNAP program here for this household. It's a relatively small benefit relative to their income. It acts as an income transfer. It's perfectly efficient because the household chooses its best point that's affordable, and whether, as an economist, we don't really care if it's the right program. We're saying, are you getting the maximum utility increase out of the money you spend? So if the government is going to commit to spending on SNAP, then it should do so in a way that maximizes sort of the well-being gain for the household. The second case is extra marginal, and it's the one that economists are concerned about, and it happens when a household has very little income and the SNAP benefit is a big part of it. So a SNAP benefit of $7 per day and the household's only contributing a small piece. Then you'll see a case like this where the household has $5 to spend on other goods, and they get this SNAP benefit of $7, and so they end up consuming way more food because the incentive is either the SNAP benefit is spent or it goes away. It has to be spent on food, so they end up consuming food out to here. But what they would really prefer, right, rather than consuming at this corner, is to have some of the income be fungible, right? Some of that income and the SNAP benefit to be fungible and go towards rent, clothing, other essentials, right, that they may be lower in to get to a higher utility curve, okay? And so what we're saying here is the SNAP benefit is so large compared to their income, right, or they are so poor that the SNAP benefit shows up large, and they're out here at this corner when in fact, if you can make this budget line go like this, right, instead of the kink being right here, they would choose to move up to a higher utility curve, okay? And so here, if the cost is $7 per day, if you gave them $7 per day and did not put the restriction on it, unlike the previous case, right, this case, whether you have the restriction or not doesn't matter, because if you draw that line and continue it up here, they still choose this point. Well, down here, this is not the case. If you can draw this line up here, there's a better utility curve up here. And so that's an inefficient policy in terms of getting the most benefit in terms of utility for this household, right? If you're going to give out money, the sort of economic condition says, this is sort of the positive economist definition. If you're giving out $7 or spending $7 from the federal budget to try to improve the situation for this household, then you should give them the option to spend some of it outside of food and let it be for clothing, other household essentials, toothpaste, Band-Aids, whatever, who knows. But whatever it could be that you might declare to be essential, because there are lots of utility gains that could be made here. Okay, and that's sort of a pure economist viewpoint on the struggle with kinked budgets, right? When you have a kinked budget, if you end up at the corner, you are just like when you have taxes, you are getting an efficiency loss. There's some benefit here. And of course, the problem here is when people talk about, you'll hear about sort of illegality in the SNAP benefit program, people trying to buy and sell, right? So they spend their SNAP benefit and then sell some of the food to try to get money. Well, typically this is the incentive, is that they have some other sort of necessities that would improve their well-being if they could convert some of the SNAP benefit to a fungible spending form, if they could convert some of it to cash. And so when you see complaints about I don't know what it's called, fraud, I guess, in the SNAP program, a big part of it's just people fraudulently filing and claiming benefits by manipulating whatever to get in the program when they shouldn't, or when they don't actually qualify. But another part that you see is people sort of buying and reselling, trying to turn food benefits into cash, and it's typically incentivized by the fact that they're over here in a corner and they have other needs that aren't allowed to be met with the SNAP program. Okay, that's sort of the economic debate. Now I just want to finish up talking through sort of the nuts and bolts of eligibility, because you're going to be reading about it. And I want to be sure that we have some sort of baseline understanding. Eligibility, the first thing is the income level you have to identify. So calculating the monthly household income has its own schedule, just like you might see in federal taxes. So there's a standard deduction based on how many dependents are in the household. Earned income deduction, so 20% of the income you make gets taken off the top, just so to deal with the fact that you have to pay into Social Security and everything, right? There's no exemptions there. Medicaid, Medicare, federal unemployment, right? All these things. So, and then, sales tax on the stuff you buy. So this 20% deduction is basically saying you're not going to get your full income. So let's take 20% off the top that is going to go elsewhere, and then other dependent care deductions. So to work, most people, if they have a dependent in the household, will have to hire someone to deal with that. So you can take the cost of the dependent care, of child care, into consideration when calculating the income level, and then the shelter deduction, which could be the utility costs, insurance, etc. related. So after you run through the schedule, you get to the net income eligibility limit. So this is the 100% of the poverty line. If you're one person and you do all the net calculations for household income, if you're at $1,005, you qualify. And as you go above that, you'll qualify more towards the maximum benefit. 2 people, $1,354. 3 people, $1,702. Okay, so these are the eligibility limits. You gotta be below these. Okay, above those, you are not qualifying. Did some calculations here. Not going to take credit for them. They came from somewhere else, or at least the idea did. But take $1,000 in net SNAP income. You might just blow that up and say it's about $1,400 in gross income per month. Just add, because 20% is the standard deduction for taxes and other costs of work, and then you get all the other potential deductions. So maybe $1,400 a month. If you take that to 12 months, it's $1,608. For the year, a 2,000-hour work week, that's about $8 an hour, and the federal minimum wage right now is $7.25 an hour. So when you see the quotes on federal minimum wage, maybe you're better at this than me. I just assumed people were picking a number and saying the federal minimum wage should be $15. It turns out it's actually based on these based on these kind of numbers on the poverty line, basically saying people working full-time hourly wage work should have this level above poverty income, right? So, taking someone to basically double. If you're a full-time worker, basically we should have jobs. It's a different sort of economic proposal. The economics of minimum wage tend to be sour, right? They tend to say that employment will be will suffer, right? And that there's a bunch of marginal employment at $10 and $11 and $9 that would be beneficial that is going to be missed if you set the minimum wage at $15. But that's the basis of this, basically saying that there's a living wage at $15 that keeps people well above the poverty line, right? And so the idea being that you do this, and if you have $15 hour minimum wage, you may be able to do more employment and support programs with the money going into something like SNAP. Instead of giving out so much money through SNAP, maybe you offer incentivized employment for places that will meet higher wage requirements, higher living standard requirements for workers. So it's tracking off onto a different debate, so to speak, but that's where it comes from. In terms of work-related eligibility, SNAP requires these ABAWD, able-bodied adults without dependents, to convert their status to be working a minimum of 20 hours a week, or they're subject to this time limit. They max out at 3 months of benefits for any given running 36-month period. So it is not possible, absent some other waiver, to stay on SNAP benefits for an extended period of time without getting into the workforce. Okay. These can be waived by states. So local labor market conditions, if you are in a region, and we're going to learn about this in our discussion session starting with the readings that are assigned on the 10th of April. Local labor market conditions, if you're in a high unemployment area, the state can waive it and extend you on SNAP. State can just make the choice to extend benefits or expand coverage, typically as sort of an economic stimulus approach. And then, of course, the debate then is, can the federal government, as the administrator of SNAP, move in and supplant with the state's ability to waive requirements and use SNAP more broadly with this ABAWD policy? That's the key debate. Basically, federal rules going into place saying, one, you have much more limited scope at the state level to allow these people, these able-bodied adults without dependents, to be waived into the SNAP program. And then a part of that as well is something called E&T, education and training programs employment and training programs operated by the state. Basically, if you have this large set of ABWDs and you have lots of unemployment, well, they don't have to be employed, but they have to enter into one of these E&T programs by the state to help prepare them for whatever sort of work may be coming along. And also there could be some public works projects that could prepare them for. The state hiring them to do things. And it's basically looking as a transitional path from SNAP into work. So at issue there, lots of states are already underfunded. And this policy, rather than saying we'll use some state money and federal money to extend benefits and try to take care of food insecurity in our state, now the federal government is saying no, you can't do that. That's now restricted. And also, you must spend state money to set up these employment and training programs so that people in this category, ABAWD, can meet their requirement not by working but by getting training. And so when you see resistance to this policy being applied sort of at a federal level, lots of states just feel like it's going to be very high cost to set up what's essentially a new employment monitoring and training system that is basically just mandated. A few more things here. So Farm Bill 2014 has written into the law SNAP eligibility related to work in all states. Here are the work-related requirements. You must register for work with whatever state employment agency or our service office is available. If you get offered a job, you have to notify and you have to accept it only if it is deemed by the state agency to be not suitable for you. You're not qualified, or you don't, or you have some sort of limitation that would keep you from taking that job. Can you pass on it? Fulfill any work, job search, training requirements administered by the state SNAP agencies, right? So some states do have training requirements, not the full E&T as imagined by the ABAWD waiver removal, but you have to be part of those. Probably have to, that's fine. And then states have to provide you have to provide whatever the sort of public assistance agency is to know what your availability is for jobs and what you are doing to search for a job. And then, of course, you have to, if you have a job or you get a job, you can't quit or you can't go below 30 hours a week without cause. And again, that would be a reason you'll work with that agency to determine that. Another debate sometimes comes up, but sort of falls away again. The immigration debate is very much on the back burner at the moment. It was serious for a couple of years. But SNAP, welfare, any kind of assistance programs often get discussed in there, basically saying, well, these people are here illegally, or they're not they're undocumented participants in the economy, but they're also getting these benefits. Well, typically, other than sort of public schooling and public parks and the other sort of things that you get access to, welfare and sort of income assistance programs and SNAP are not open to undocumented immigrants to the U.S. So to be eligible, you need to be a citizen. If you are not a citizen and you want to be eligible, you need to meet one of these criteria. So you could be an immigrant child that has current legal status. That means born in the U.S. so that they have birthright citizenship at the time, and then, of course, they may have the option later to change their citizenship status. Permanent residents, these are visa holders that do not have citizenship, but they have been in the U.S. for 5 years. That visa is a work visa that allows them to be here and working. And that's 5 years of paying into federal tax programs without being eligible. So that's the prior period you had to be paying in. Elderly and disabled with legal status prior to 1996, the last sort of big immigration reform bill that conferred some legal status to undocumented migrants. So it was one in the 80s, one again in the 90s, and those are the last two we had of those. If you're a refugee or sought asylum and it was conferred to you from the U.S., then you are eligible. But that is a legal status. And then finally, if you're a migrant serving in the military, that is also that. But that's it. That's anything else is either fraud in the SNAP program or someone giving out misinformation. So it's one or the other. I already talked about this a little before in the previous lecture, but I did want to talk about the sort of relationship to nutrition. The Farm Bill calls the SNAP program and any other sort of food assistance, low-income assistance programs nutrition, because it does get pegged to sort of what is towards the USDA's role, not on the farm side, but on the food side, of trying to provide best information and education to people on food and nutrition, and sort of how can you get the most out of food consumption. And so certainly the case when you're receiving allocations from the federal government that go towards consumption for your food, they are sort of obliged to give you some information and education along with it, and that's where the Thrifty Food Plan comes in. The costs tends to stay the same, that sort of $3.89 or $4 target spending tries to stay the same pretty much. And what they do is look for what kind of adjustments should people meet, what kind of recommendations can they make, and that's where the education program comes in to try to help people find plans and make plans to consume at that $3.89 threshold. And then, of course, most households only qualify on the income side. They are at the threshold, but not far enough below it to get the maximum allotment. So only at any time about 1/3 to or 33% to 40% will get maximum allotments. In other words, they go all the way down to zero on SNAP net income. And so we saw that because the maximum benefit is 1 in 92, but the average benefit is about 126, per person. So that means that is how you get from most, a bunch of people, or a chunk, 30 to 40%, getting the full maximum allotment, and then a bunch of partial allotments. Here's the schedule right? So as the number of people added, I think this is wrong. It says 144 is the marginal. That only is after you get to 8 people. Well, 7. Right? This one's 44, and then 144, and then every additional one's 144. But it starts out at like 160. So that's not important. But you can see the scale here. Basically, it's more expensive for one person to eat per person than 2 people. There's some efficiency and scale, I guess, in preparation and so forth. You get to buy larger packages of things, so forth. So this reduction, you see, go all the way down until finally 144. So if you were thinking sort of at the ultimate margin, about 144 being the maximum benefit, that would be correct. So again, it just gets back to, it's not a terribly lucrative program, and it really is this sort of, can you live on $4 a day? That's $1 and $1.33 per meal, and most people don't do it, but to be a maximum benefit person in the SNAP program implies that you have very little income to contribute towards food. Almost all of your food spending is going to come from the SNAP budget, and that's the plan, right? To meet that. And so it's that's the sort of situation. So at the individual level, it's pretty dire. It isn't considered lucrative, but it's also a big and growing program that people are interested in understanding. What is the success path? What is the sort of longer run objective? Is it long run federal support for meeting food requirements, or can it have this broader goal of bridging people back into employment and higher income status out of the program, graduating out of the program? And so it's interesting. It's not entirely ag policy, but it is a big piece of demand, right? We would notice if $70 billion in food spending, domestic food spending, went away, and so to some extent you have sort of an alliance on the food production side with the sort of food assistance side, saying, we can keep making more and more food, but we need a distribution system and at least enough sort of income spread out around the country to make the sales, right? Because and then of course there's other programs, direct food transfers, buying up surplus. A lot of that has sort of fallen away as the government's gotten out of the business of sort of storing and distributing foodstuffs. And then of course there's just a whole other range of policies, and then of course there's a bigger policy debate really around inequality, and as the government tackles the current crisis by just giving people checks, it's raised this idea of, what if this was the way things worked all the time? What if there was this universal basic income allotment that everyone got of $900 or $1,200 a month per person, and instead of going out and means testing everyone's income, you just allocated it and said, this covers all the bases on food spending and food insecurity, and it also has this sort of inequality reducing effect, because you are sort of taking away, you're making a big percentage gain in income at the low end of the distribution. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see where we get into the sort of nuts and bolts of the food debate, but also just more broadly inequality debate, given sort of the circumstances of what the economy, the shape it has had to take in response to COVID. Okay, but that'll end up this lecture, so I'm going to go ahead and cut us off and let you move on.